Hello and welcome everyone to a two-part webinar series hosted by the IWFM Technology Special Interest Group, which acts as an introduction to FMs seeking to use building information modelling. I'm Cathy Hayward, Deputy Chair of the IWFM London region and the founder of Magenta Associates, the workplace communication experts, and I'll be your chair across both webinars. So today's session will last up to an hour and we'll hear from three experts, the authors of the IWFM Good Practice Guide to BIM Data for FM Systems, who I'll introduce you to in a moment. But we don't want this to be us kind of talking at you. There'll be several polls throughout the event so you can share your views, and also there's a chance to ask questions to our panel. So please get thinking of those now and you can type them into the question panel to the side of your screen. This is a CPD event and I'll be giving out the CPD number at the end, so do have a pen to hand at that point. So let's introduce our expert panel. You've already heard about me. I've been writing about the facilities management world for the best part of 2 decades, and now I'd like to introduce the authors of the Good Practice Guide to BIM Data for FM Systems. Firstly, Dr. Simon Ashworth is a lecturer and researcher teaching FM degree programmes at the Zurich University of Applied Sciences. His specialist research areas are FM digital topics and BIM, and before his academic career he worked in FM for 20 odd years. So next we have Jason Clark, who's a regional property manager responsible for capital projects, hard services maintenance, and a key member of the project management team delivering UBS's facility in London. Jason led the technical programme delivery, intelligent building, soft landing and BIM strategy there. And finally, Mike Packham is a chartered facilities management surveyor with over 35 years experience. In terms of IT for FM, his interest lies not so much with the technology itself, but more with the use of the data that it generates to enable better management of the working environment. As I said, all three co-authored the Good Practice Guide to BIM Data for FM Systems, so they're the ideal people to talk to us today. So welcome everyone. Before we start our discussion, I'd just like to signpost you to some key resources about BIM and technology and FM more generally, really. The IWFM Technology SIG has a community page on the IWFM website and on LinkedIn, where there is plenty of debate. There's going to be follow-up discussions from this webinar posted on the LinkedIn group in the coming days. So we'd love to hear from IWFM members about that, and also any other areas that you particularly like us to focus on in the second webinar in this series. In addition to BIM, there are publications planned on topics as diverse as drones, AI, smart buildings and reality capture, so lots of exciting things happening there. But BIM is what we're here to talk about today. The IWFM's Good Practice Guide to BIM Data for FM Systems was published in 2020, but of course its launch was rather overshadowed by COVID, which is why we're only really starting to talk about it now. As I mentioned, today is the first in a two-part series. Today we're going to focus on the what, why and how of BIM data for FM, and then in a couple of weeks on the 20th of May we'll give some practical advice on planning and managing the transfer of BIM data into operational systems, and we'll have a different panel of experts for that. So I promised that you wouldn't just be sitting back there listening, so let's start with a quick poll. We're interested in knowing about your understanding of BIM at the moment, so we can kind of tailor our discussion accordingly. So can we ask you the question, what experience do you have of working with BIM? You only need to select one. You've worked on BIM projects, you're currently planning your first BIM project, or no experience at all. So I'll give you a moment or so to answer that. As I said, it'll give us a chance to really kind of tailor the discussion accordingly. So click on the most relevant answer on your screen, and then we'll see the results. Any minute now. Here we go. So 36% of you have worked on some BIM projects, 13% are currently planning your first BIM project, and just over half of you have no experience at all. So thank you very much for taking the time to do that. I think it's really valuable for us to be able to kind of understand where the audience is at, so our experts can tailor it accordingly. I certainly don't know very much about BIM, so I'm interested to hear more about it today. So let us start with Mike Packham. Mike, I'm going to pose what's probably the most basic question about BIM that I can think of to get us started. What is it really all about?
Sounds like a cue for a song, doesn't it, really? What is BIM? Well, I think let's start by reminding ourselves where BIM came from. We go back to April 2016, and the government mandated that we should be using BIM level 2 on all public sector projects. So what's happened in the interim? Well, as an FM consultant, I operate across both capital projects and the operational side of things. And from my perspective, it's the construction side of the FM equation that has really taken on board BIM. And maybe we can come back to that later and sort of debate the issue around why the take up amongst FM has not been as rapid as perhaps we thought it should be. But certainly there's a number of issues around that, I think. But as I say, from my perspective, certainly the construction side of the equation has certainly been making better use of BIM than perhaps we have in the world of FM. And of course, that's really what we're here to do today. So what is BIM? Well, I've tried to put a definition up there on the screen. BIM, according to the gurus, is the process of building information modeling. It's the action or creation and maintenance of a database of information relating to a building. Now, to me, the emphasis here needs to go on maintenance, because I think that the minute you hand over a BIM model from the construction team to the FM team, it's probably out of date. And we really need to be thinking about not only getting the BIM model to start with, but how we keep it up to date going forward. And it's a two-way thing, I think, between the Packham system, between the IWMS or whatever else we're using, and the BIM model itself. So the BIM model is a statement at the moment in time that the contractors disappear off site, wheels spin in to get out of the car park because they all want to go on holiday or whatever. So I think, to me, it's not about technology, and sorry for the software manufacturers and so forth that are listening here. It's a process, but certainly it's a process which is enabled by IT. And I don't think, given the volume of data that we handle as FMs these days, I don't think it's realistic to expect us not to have to use technology in some way. But the emphasis to me is it's a process and not a software application. So let's think about that as we're going through. As I say, this is really about trying to set the scene. And if we think about some of the sources of information, if we can flip onto the next slide there, please. IWFM, or BIFM as it was when we started working on this, my BIM days with or BIFM as it was at the time go back to 2013, I think. So I've been working in this arena with some of the other members on the panel today since then. IWFM published a number of related documents, and some of those are listed up there on the screen now. The role of FM in BIM projects, for example, is directly related to what we're talking about. But you will find when we get to the end of the session that there's links to all of the documentation there. Now, all of that forms part of the government's UK BIM framework, which is what's shown up here. And an integral part of that BIM framework is the ISO 19650 regulations. I should say standards rather than regulations, shouldn't I? Those of you familiar with BIM may well recall with some fondness PAS 1192. PAS 1192 doesn't exist anymore. It's been absorbed into ISO 19650, but part 2 of PAS was about the construction side, and then part 3 was about the operational side. And the graphic on the bottom of this slide here is attempting to show the relationship between what was PAS 1192 part 2, PAS 1192 part 3, in that from the construction phase, whether it's a new build or refurbishment or whatever else it is, we get our project information model. And then in the operational phase, we get our asset information model. And what this document is that we're talking about today is telling you or helping you to get the information out of the PIM and into the AIM. And essentially, that's what we're here today to talk about. So I think that's probably all I wanted to say on the subject. So I'll pass over to, I think it's Jason who's coming on next.
Thanks, Mike. I think that's a really good a good starting point for us. So I guess let's think about the next consideration, which I guess is BIM workflow. What's your take on this? As Mike said, Jason, you're probably the best person to answer this.
Sorry, thank you, Kathy. I've done that. I'm on mute. It's kind of we do on every call now. Yeah, so long gone are the days where we talk about projects and the only kind of few questions we ask is, do you want your O&Ms in paper or electronic form, and do you want spares and being handed a set of keys at the end of the project? You're being asked for lots of information up front on these projects. So from your organizational information requirements, your asset information requirements, how that information is going to be exchanged, how and when it's going to be transferred and in what format. So really, it's right at the start of the project, you're being asked for some really detailed information, and straight away with all your day-to-day workload, you've got to look at your systems that you use and the tools that you use, look at the data sets within them. Which data do you use most? Is there duplication of data, conflict in data? Is there correlating data between those systems? And how is that data processed? And overall, what's our organizational reporting requirements? Because ultimately, if you think of the end in mind, whatever we report, we want to capture in data, and we want to make it kind of single source data, and we want to replicate that into reports very, very quickly. So this is kind of very alien to FM at the start, but I think since the kind of immersion of BIM and the kind of focus on construction and 3D modeling, this has now moved more into operational systems and looking at all of the operational systems and having that visibility. So if we move into the next slide, please. So we're talking about taking that information from those single source siloed data environments and trying to harmonize that within the common data environment. And I kind of, this is a kind of a slide that I used during the project, but I think the BIM model is now on the outside, and it's more about the common data environment being in the middle. And so we use the model, the tools to view data in different ways. They've all got very different functions, and we've got different needs from them. There's no one single tool or system. So it's about this pulling together of these different environments. And if you get, I kind of like to think of it as looking for a looking glass. So if you jump to the next slide, please. So yeah, many different sources of data, many different systems and different requirements. And gone are the days where we are thinking about just O&M asset information. We're now correlating data between the room booking panel, the desk presence sensor, the IoT sensors to validate occupation, validate agile sharing ratios and things like that. So it's become very complex, and there's multiple pools of data, and some of this data remains in data lakes, and we don't utilize it. So if we jump to the next slide, please. So I kind of, if I would like to describe BIM for me and why we need to follow the process, it's our ability at the end of the project to be able to pull together all of our data sources, and through that looking glass, focus on the data sets that we need for the relevant business information that we need in that report at that time. So we might be looking at O&Ms and drawings at one time, and then if we flip to the next slide, we might be looking at maintenance information, asset information, and we might be even looking at the model itself. So there's many uses. If we talk about what the why, the obvious reason is it improves the handover process, reduces cost, engagement of the FM team throughout the project, creating single source data environments, capturing the FM's knowledge and experience from the outset. The designers, the architects are not the experts in operating the building, FM is, and so therefore they're an equal party in the process. And I think we've obviously focused very much on data here and data in BIM, but this goes across all of the services, and we're going to kind of expand on that slightly in later in the presentation. And really just making sure that FM is procured early in the process and not when the building's built. That's me.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks, Jason. I think it's really useful, particularly the piece about the single version of the truth. I'm sure a lot of FMs will that will resonate with them. So let us get on to our next poll. Has your organisation started to adopt BIM in the operational FM phase? This is a simple yes or no answer, but it'd be really interesting to get your take as our audience on where you are in that BIM operational FM phase. So give you a moment or two to answer that, and then we'll look at the results. Okay, so I think from that is about a quarter of you have started, but 3/4 haven't, which is really interesting. So thank you very much for taking part in that. Let's move on to planning for the transfer of data from the BIM process. Simon, can I ask you to talk our audience through that area?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing here for me that's really important is to think about the advantages that we're going to get out of BIM. There's a lot of research and industry reports available. So, for example, the Price Waterhouse Group produced a very detailed report called the BIM Benefits Methodology report, and it showed that the operational benefits for BIM are going to be about 73% of the overall benefits. And they had 2 case studies in their report where they showed that over the whole life of a project, by using BIM, you could save about 1.5 to 3% of the total whole life cycle costs. Now, when you look at the second graphic on the right-hand side there, the other thing that's hugely important to think about is that in terms of the long life project, a building might be built in, say, 2 to 5 years, but a building might last 25 to 50 years. And so our focus definitely needs to be on how do we use information over the whole life of a building. And traditionally, there was a problem often getting FMs involved in the BIM process, in a construction process, because it was at the point of handover that often we were involved. But BIM, as Jason and Mike have shown now, is very clearly demanding that FM are thinking about their information requirements right at the start of a project, and that's really important. I use the simple analogy of if you're going to a garage and you want to order a car, if you don't give a very clear description of what you want to get from the car, you shouldn't be surprised if you end up with a Mini instead of a Rolls Royce or vice versa, because they both get you from A to B. The big difference with a building is you can't give it back once you've got it. It is what it is. So if you could move to the next slide, please. So I think that Jason's already touched on information requirements, which for me is probably the hub of what FMs need to think about in the BIM process. And the graphic that Jason showed from ISO 19650 with the OIRs and the AIRs and the EIRs and all these acronyms, I think that one graphic he showed would be the graphic I would suggest to people that they get their head around. But before the days of BIM, we used to do projects. We've been doing them for many years. The difference is that now everything is being digitalized. Okay, so the organizational information requirements for me are just about my reporting needs. So I know that one of the guys is going to talk about that later, but it's really thinking about what information do I actually need for reporting. And we use pain and gain workshops with people to actually help them very clearly define, if I need these sets of reports in my day-to-day business, and those reports contain the following bits of information, I can then reverse engineer and say to the building team, I need this information inside the BIM model, or at least from the BIM process, in order to be able to produce the reports at the end. And the asset information requirements are basically about then going a level deeper and saying what specific information do I need exactly for my individual assets. And the problem we often face here is that people say everything. And actually, what we should be aiming for is just an 80-20 approach, where you minimize the amount of information to what it is that you really need. And that's explicitly stated in the 19650 standards. And then the EIR, and there's an example here which you can get from what's the BIFM logo here, but it's actually the IWFM. And this is a template you can download. And if you're involved in a BIM project, it will give you a good starter for 10, and it will stop you having to start everything from scratch. And the EIR needs to be crystal clear to tell the rest of the construction chain what they need to deliver in order to make sure that when you get to the end and you want to bring all that information into your Packham or other systems, that it's structured in a way that makes that easy to do. So thank you very much, Kathy. You can move on.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Simon. That was a really good answer. We've had quite a number of questions coming already, so do think up some more and put them to our panel, and then we can discuss them at the end. But before we start talking about FM reporting, which is our next topic, I'd like to just kind of go out for a quick poll. You can answer as many of these as you like, with multiple choice options. So which of the following do you use for your FM reporting? CAFM, CMMS, IWMS, whatever you like to call it, software, building management system, energy management system, health and safety or compliance software, or something else. So which of the following do you use for your FM reporting? It'd be really interesting to hear about that as we move in to talk a little bit about FM reporting and BIM. So let's wait and get the results of that. But so the majority are using CAFM software, but also a BMS system and health and safety compliance software. So a real mix across there. But that's really interesting. So thank you very much, everyone, for taking part there. So Mike, back to you. Armed with that insight from our audience, can you comment on the reporting piece with BIM, please?
Yeah, I think in many ways I'd just like to pick up on what both Jason and Simon have just said, in that it's not so much about the quantity of data, it's about the quality of that data. So I think that there's almost my data storage facility is bigger than your data storage facility type mentality out there, isn't there? Certainly among the techies on the IT teams within a lot of our organizations. And to me, that, well, okay, you can collect absolutely everything if you want to. What benefit are you going to get out of collecting that data? And it's the Pareto principle, the 80-20 ratio that we need to be thinking about there. And I think the other point I'd say on data actually is just being able to make sure that it is comparable across the piece, because very often, I mean, within my practice, we do a lot of benchmarking. And one of the issues we constantly find is that different organizations capture their data in different ways. So if you're going to be able to report, and you're going to be able to report on a comparable basis, maybe you've got a number of buildings on your estate, everybody needs to be capturing that information in the same way. So that's the first point I think I'd say. It's about quality rather than quantity. And in terms of quality, we need to make sure that we're recording everything on the same basis. And we do have protocols in place that supposedly help us with that. But as I say, in benchmark terms, even if we give somebody a protocol for defining, I don't know, cleaning or whatever, different people will interpret that protocol in different ways. So there's always a margin of variance, if you like, on what we're getting back. So I think in terms of reporting access, you need to think about what it is you've got to report on, and that's what I think picks up on the point that Simon was just making. So some of the basic questions we need to be asking ourselves: who are our stakeholders? Some of those will be internal to the organization, and in terms of the organization there, we might just be talking about the facilities management regime within the organization. Depends on how you define internal and external. But if you've got, I don't know, shareholders, for example, in your company, they may well be stakeholders that you need to report to on a regular basis. So we need to think about who the stakeholders are, both internal and external, to our organisation. It's a stakeholder mapping exercise, effectively. Don't want to go off on a tangent and start talking about stakeholder mapping exercises, because we'll be here for quite a long time. But we need to understand who those stakeholders are and what type of reports they need. And some of those will be contractual, if we're in a contractual relationship with our third-party providers, our maintenance contractors or whoever. Some of them will be for internal purposes. And once we've identified who our stakeholders are, then we need to start to think about what's the contents of those reports, when are they needed, and so forth. But it's about understanding the data that you need to start with. Don't just collect everything, because you will end up tying yourself in knots. And if we can just quickly flick on to the next one, there's some examples here of the sorts of reports that you may want to think about. And it goes down from investment fund all the way down to regional managers. I think when we first drafted this list, it actually went down a stage further into the actual service managers for each. But I think the point is, different people need to know different things at different times. But the key to it is to make sure that you're using the same base data every time. Because what you find, if you're managing a maintenance service, for example, you will want to know whether your maintenance contractor is hitting their KPIs or SLAs or wherever you defined your service levels. At the next tier up, the manager of FM will just want to know whether you, as the maintenance manager, are achieving your goals. So the base data is the same, but as you go up the tree, it pyramids. So just think about the absolute minimum data that you need, I think, is my recommendation. But don't preclude the future. It's a difficult balance there, isn't it? Because if you say you don't need something now, next year you might want it because the managing director's changed or something, and he wants you to report against something completely different. So there's a bit of a balance to be had there, I think. But in essence, quality rather than quantity would be my message.
I think that's a good one there, Mike. Thank you very much for that. So let's move on and talk about the process of planning and delivering the services FMs provide. Jason, can I ask you perhaps to talk through this element?
Yes, Kathy, sure. So I think here it's about having a process framework to work to, and I can't talk about this subject without talking about the soft landings or operational readiness piece that comes alongside BIM is often forgotten. But ultimately, buildings are not constructed in the first week of a project, so they use the REBA kind of gateways to kind of move along the plan of works. Similarly with the soft landings, there's a similar kind of framework. We created our own framework. We slightly changed the name so our operators could really embrace it in terms of inception, informing the building design. And under each of these, there's some tasks that need to be carried out at different stages. So it's not eating an elephant in the first day, it's breaking it down into bite-sized chunks, breaking it down into a plan of works and working through that. And if we think of any system or tool that we use, it's ultimately about data. It's about our operational processes and now how they interact with that data. And then at the back end, we get reports that we get management insights from. So really creating the environment where your FM SMEs can work together, share their processes, their SOPs, their EOPs, identify touch points between them, and then really start working through this list of tasks that go beyond just BIM. And I think the document it kind of suggests that you should think about these things even if you're not using BIM, because it's a structured approach to delivering FM services. If you take very quickly a simple asset like a chiller, at the outset it's going to be designed, it's going to have a specification, it's ultimately going to go through some optioneering where we may look at whole life cycle costing through technical submission, through technical approval, into installation and commissioning and testing information, and then ultimately warranties, FM maintenance requirements, and then FM maintenance evidence. So you take that one single asset, all of that data and information you need to capture through the life of that asset. And unfortunately, you need to describe most of this during the life cycle of the project itself, so that you capture it first time and you're not then doing that massive validation exercise that you would do traditionally at the end of the project, and how many assets have we got. And if you're an operational manager like myself, there's nothing more frustrating when your facilities team find 100 assets 2 years after the building's been built.
I'm sure that will resonate with quite a few people there, Jason.
Yes.
Thank you for that. So as we get to the final part, our kind of formal part of the session, Simon, over to you, perhaps just to finish us off talking about data considerations.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think, as Mike said, for me, one of the key things is definitely the quality versus the quantity discussion, because I think as human beings, we're not capable of dealing with huge amounts of data at the moment. But I think also here, if you think about the way that we use data, we pull it from all sorts of different devices, all sorts of different places, and we need to think about how that data is actually going to be used in our day-to-day business. So IoT sensors are becoming more and more common these days, and just to differentiate between BIM and digital twins, BIM is mainly about static data, so I think about it as in the past the as-built drawings, information, and now 3D models you will get. So in the BIM project you'll get 3D models, information, and possibly thousands of documents. And the idea is to sort of be clear about which of those is important to which of these systems. So we need to think about which target systems we want to end up putting that data into. And that brings us to topics like classification, categorization, and content. And it's very important that when you're working on a BIM project, that everybody is working to one classification system, because if the contractors are naming something with an IFC type of code, and that's not something which you have in your system, when you try to map it and move data between one location and another, you can end up with all sorts of problems. So coming back to the example that Jason was talking about with the pump, LCC might be a great example where you say, what data do I need to be in the BIM model versus what do I need to be outside of the BIM model? And so LCC could be something where if I want to carry out a project where I have to renovate my windows and I want a report that tells me how many windows have I got in the building, which type of windows, what does each one cost, and importantly, when is its life cycle replacement due, I need that data in the BIM model in order to be able to generate a report that allows me to do that. However, other data I might keep in other systems. So could you move to the next slide then, please, Kathy? So I think this is just a diagram from a great paper by Packham et al., which shows on the right-hand side these benefits and challenges of BIM. I think it's super important that we're really realistic about what we expect to get out of BIM. In the early days of BIM, I think there was, how can you say, an over tendency of consultants to sell it as it can do everything in the universe. And it wasn't realistic, and then basically because people had not structured their data, the data didn't flow cleanly into Packham and other type systems, and then clients had a bad perception of what it was able to do. So I think that the challenges and the benefits need to be clearly mapped out in an organization, so you're very clear what you actually want to do. And then the owner requirements definition at the top is super important. So you need to take time. The old adage of measure twice, cut once is super important there. Take time to think about what you really need, what your definition requirements are. And then the common data environment is these days often an IT piece which is set up by IT experts, where basically the data is all stored in one central place, which allows all the team members to go to that. It's important to think about legal considerations, because not everybody thinks about who legally owns that data there. And then basically, once you've got all your information from the BIM process, from the common data environment, ultimately you should end up in the AIM. And people talk about the single source of the truth. but I think that we need to acknowledge the fact that you might have one BIM project and, I don't know, 100 other buildings that exist in a real estate portfolio. So it's always going to be a blend between a very good, rich data source from BIM and maybe other data sources which are not so good. But this validation exercise is super important at the end to say, how can you check that what you asked for, you actually get? And there are some very clever tools. We're working with some people like Liebal in Switzerland who are developing systems whereby you don't need to have BIM knowledge in order to be able to involve input. So tier one contractors like Costain or some of those people, that they might be familiar with BIM, but the people who are doing the buildings, sorry, the walls or the fence, the windows, they might not be so familiar with BIM. And new systems are coming on the market now which send links to people where they can click on it, they can input all the data that the FMs have already defined, and they can view the models without needing all the complex software. So it's a complex environment, but I think these new technologies that are coming on will help us a lot. Thanks very much, Kathy.
Thanks, Simon. That's great. And everyone, thank you. I think that was all very insightful. I'm now going to open it up to the audience, and we have had a whole ton of questions come in, which is fantastic and shows how engaged people are with this topic. Couple of questions are around whether the slides are going to be available, and yes, they are, and they will be on the IWFM Technology Special Interest Group's LinkedIn page, and there will be an opportunity to ask more questions and kind of follow up with the debate afterwards. So do go there after this session. I should also say that we've also got other sources of information to share with you, which we'll put up a slide shortly. Oh, here we go, about that. So there's plenty of other places to go for information. But let's start kind of putting some of these questions to the panel. What I say to our panel is, just kind of shout out if you want to kind of answer this one. We don't necessarily have, everybody doesn't have to answer obviously every question, because there are a lot. So to kick us off, would outsourced managing agents have the software to manage BIM? Are they ready for this to support FM and the client? And are FMs doing enough to make their supply chain aware of what BIM is? So a couple of questions there in one. I guess the piece about managing agents, and are FMs doing enough to make their supply chain aware of what BIM is? Who wants to kick us off with an answer to that one? Go on, Jason.
So yeah, I think so. The idea that they're coming along with a piece of software tool to manage it is not the kind of reality. They come along with all of their expertise in all of their tools. So if you talk about CMMS systems, they'll all come with their own CMMS systems. And I found that there's no one that knows these systems more than the FM providers, because they use it on a large scale. So what they need to come armed with is their knowledge of the systems and tools, their knowledge of the data sets and reporting requirements, and the kind of common data environment, how the data is structured. So really they need to be experienced, or certainly get that experience in how to manage data from many different sources, regardless of whether you've got a BIM project or not. Because if we'd have put, I suspect, a question up of who now talks about common data environment and correlating data sources from their FM and building systems, I think most people are having those conversations now, because it's becoming so pivotal, particularly in today's environment where we're looking for those that validation of our belief that, say for instance, occupation during COVID, we know exactly in every one of our buildings how well is occupied from our security data, from our desk data, from our systems, people logging on, and from presence sensors. So that correlation of all those data sources, that's BIM for me, and we haven't even mentioned a model.
Okay, there's the follow-up question actually here for you, Jason. You talked about multiple single source environments. Is one of the issues that organisations need to have a strategy for storing information and making it available to the applicable software? Organisations need to understand the centralised approach to data storage for that to happen. Could the team, could Jason and Simon and Mike perhaps offer some advice, some approach to kind of setting that up?
So for me, it's about them looking at all of those sources, and I think it was, as Simon said, picking out the items that are relevant beyond that single tool. So if you think of a BMS system, there's a massive data lake of data that we never ever probably look at or share, but there will be information on energy and things like that that we will want to pull into other data sources and create insights. So for me, it's about having that strategy of what data do we need to share to get a richer picture of how the building operates.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Simon, one for you. You talked about that, given the early involvement is such a key issue in optimising FM effectiveness. What are the key areas that academics can focus on in developing this key issue? Where does research need to be conducted in your opinion? This is a question, Connell Shaw, University College Dublin.
Okay, I think there's a lot of focus on the technology and there's quite a lot on the process. I don't think there's as much focus on the people as we need. And, FM is very much a people business. And I think that in order for anybody to do anything successfully in a BIM or otherwise project, they need to have some basic competences, and I think it would be good to get a good understanding. I tried to do that through my PhD, which people are welcome to find via Liverpool John Moore University. But I think that the idea that, we see in Switzerland where I am, they call it a Baustellerkompetenz. That means the ability of people to be able to order a BIM project properly. And in the old days, that was like, yes, I'll have a BIM level 2 project without actually really knowing what that means. So I think there is a basic level of we need to help people, good grounds for a webinar like this, get up to grips with, basics of BIM, and then be able to move past that and say, okay, when I go into a project team, how can I get the most out of that? So for me, I think research around how we are doing as an industry in that area is something that, we really should be focusing on.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Mike, question that's come in for you. You talked about that, given the top-down standardisation is lacking for agreeing data formats, given diversity of FM scope, what are the directions of interest for the speakers? Open data, structured linked data, property graph, cloud-based? What piques your own interest looking forward?
Probably any or all of those, to be honest. I think open data has got to be the way forward, hasn't it? But we need the open data recorded in a standard way, and not just within an organisation, across the industry as a whole. And I think that's, one of the benefits of BIM, from my perspective, is the ability to look at what has worked in the operational phase of a building that's been brought forward from the construction phase. So it's all about learning lessons about what we've done during construction that benefits the operational phase. And unless we are recording the basis of those decisions and recording them on a common basis, then we are never ever going to be able to learn lessons and take those lessons from one organisation, from one building to another. So to me, I don't think it necessarily matters too much which one you use, as long as there is a standard one.
Okay, there's a good kind of more general question, I guess, that's come in, which is quite interesting. Is anyone doing this well? Are there any really good examples that the panel would like to share with the audience? I know Jason's got a fantastic project at UBS.
I was going to say, spare blushes here, but
Jason, do you want to very briefly just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, in terms of, I think we were learning as we went, and look, it's easy now to look back 6-8 years and identify areas where we could have done things better. But I think in terms of the important information for operations that we still leverage today, I think that's the value of it. And for instance, the O&Ms, we moved away from the package-based O&M systems and went to more of a asset-based system. That was one of the key decisions that we made, because we can very quickly search on systems electronically and get really, really pertinent information across all of those aspects I talked through in the process. As we've kind of moved, if I'm honest, I thought it would be more around the model, but the reality is we only use the model when we intervene in terms of large scale projects. We don't use the model day-to-day operations, but the way we correlate data has given us some amazing insights in saving costs and space. And I think everyone on the call, if they manage buildings, will manage the energy of a building, and if it's not what we think it to be, we then go and investigate. Is their plant running too long, or are we set points too high? All of that. When you apply that across all of your operational kind of teams, and apply that level of insight and see how, for instance, the lift data correlated with the staff restaurant data tells you how we're using the building. For me, that was really the Nirvana moment. This is what BIM is. And when I talk about that looking glass, it's less about the model and more about diving into these data sources and getting the richer picture. The room booking system, online room booking system, our rooms are only booked for like 50%, but the on-the-day booking systems, they're booked another 10%. But then when you look at the IoT sensors and overlay that, you realise that all of the rooms are booked all the time. If you just took that single source of data, you'd have closed half of our meeting rooms.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Mike, Simon, any other good examples of where BIM is being done well in your experience?
I would mention just some websites that I think are interesting. So I think the Scottish Futures Trust, they have a really nice thing called the BIM portal. When you go there, it's like a nice graphic that shows how you progress through a BIM project, and they give you plenty of examples of tools which you can download, which you can use, and so I would suggest they're worth checking out. Graham Kelly and a couple of other guys wrote a paper about, it's a little bit old now, but about using BIM in a university. So there are some academic papers, and I don't want to sell my own work, but the last on the list here, this research paper, that's like 100 odd pages long interactive PDF, which people can go into, and there's 10 different areas there that show lots and lots of case studies for different types of applications that people might be interested in. So I think also to touch on what Jason said, another thing that we need to be a little bit aware of is that when you build a building with BIM, like I said, it's almost like in the old days, we built a building, we got the as-built drawings, and those are static data. They just sit there, they're in your repository, but what Jason is talking about now is more and more we're moving into this, using the BIM model as a basis for a digital twin, where we then get live data streams from sensors or from wherever it comes from, and it's that data in the future that is going to, I think, have more worth than the as-built stuff. But the as-built stuff is super important because it's almost like the foundation of the beginning of the process.
Okay. Another question's come in about that we're talking quite a bit about BIM in relation to the adoption of data when a BIM-enabled project is complete. How much effort should go into reverse BIMing existing buildings? It'd be good to have some advice or commentary on that. Who's better to answer that one?
I think I'll go first. I think from my perspective, we've got to bear in mind that 90% or whatever the figure is of the UK estate is existing. So the opportunities for BIM in new buildings is quite limited. But having said that, there's no reason why we can't go in. We've got the scanning devices to go in and create digital models of buildings now. And I've seen them myself. You've just set the thing up and off it goes. I don't understand how it goes, but it does it. it generates the information. So, and I think there's quite a good example of the RICS did it on their headquarters building, which used to be on their website. I'm not sure it still is, but they did that maybe 5 years ago, and they went in. The building's been there for 100 or 50 years or something. So they went in, they scanned it, and they produced a model from that information. So yes, it's entirely possible. And as the IT advances, data capture improves, then it is increasingly becoming cost effective. I mean, I take a ridiculous example. I did a mini BIM model, if you like, of putting a data center into an old plant room for a client, and it cost us a day's scanning to get the information into the model, £500 or something. So it's really
actually a question's come in about scanning. Someone's asked about scan to BIM. Have you found it easier, more cost effective to laser scan the building at the end rather than adapt to BIM? Is there any value in scanning existing buildings?
Can I take that?
Yeah, go on.
Because I just wanted to add that to what Mike said, is I've got a student, for example, we're using a new approach called photogrammetry now. And the idea of photogrammetry is that basically you go into a building with a camera, you photograph the whole of the building, and then you use some fancy software, and we're doing it with a company called Framents in Switzerland. And basically it produces a 3D model of the building. And the nice thing is it's super high definition photography. And then what you can do is you can add information points into it. Like if I do a scan to BIM project, the problem with a reversed engineered scan to BIM is all you're ever going to see is you scan the building and you produce a BIM model, but it has no information in it. Okay, so as Mike said at the beginning, the information is the important bit. So when people are doing retro BIM modeling, they need to think about what information do I want to add into the model in order to give it a value. And so photogrammetry is another version of like scan to BIM, for want of it, but it's not producing a BIM model, it's producing a 3D model, right? Now, in the future, what I think is going to happen is most new builds will all be BIM because that's the way of the future. And the other existing assets will either be a scan to BIM where you laser scan a project, you then have to build a BIM. It's an expensive process, just bear that in mind, right? But you can produce a good quality BIM, but with laser scanning or photogrammetry, you can only see what you can see. So the laser cannot see what's behind the wall, so you get no information about pipes behind the wall. So you have to be very careful about what it is you want to achieve with that. And we're doing lots of studies at our university. If anybody's interested, they can contact me later and I'll gladly try and help them out with some information about that.
Okay. Thanks, Simon. That's great. We've got way more questions that we can possibly answer today, but let's crack on with a few more before we close. Can we comment on the relationship or the benefits? We've talked a lot about the benefits in terms of cost, potential reduction of cost, but what about sustainability? Is there a good relationship between BIM and sustainability? Is one of our questions. Who'd like to take that?
So I'll certainly add a piece of when I talked about the life cycle modelling. So that whole early optioneering, as I call it, where designers put forward a specification for an asset, and you as operators have the opportunity to look at that asset, its cost, its whole life cycle cost, and its energy performance, and have an opinion on whether that's the right asset. I'm not saying that projects will always take on board your opinion because ultimately cost is a major factor, but a kind of serious kind of organisation that wants to drive their energy performance down, then they can adopt kind of energy efficiencies throughout the selection process and things like that. So that's just one aspect of how it improves the building sustainability. And I think with the BREEAM and LEED and using BIM, you're able to identify far more easily all your sources of kind of forestry council wood and things like that, and have the evidence there as well. So I've used our information that was kind of compiled throughout the construction process in our ISO audits, for instance, for 14001. So we constantly refer to manufacturers' literature, cost sheets, things like that, that are all maintained throughout the life of the building. So yeah, I think that it helps with kind of creating a sustainable building.
Brilliant, thanks Jason. In the last minute or so that we've got left, does the UK FM industry still need an industry consortium to be formed to agree and deliver a common data standard for life cycle BIM? Mike, is this one for you?
Short answer to that one, yes. Within my practice, We do quite a bit of life cycle modelling, and absolutely, whether it's an industry-wide body or not, I don't know. The FM industry is not great at collaborating with itself. The original BIM initiative was a government-sponsored one, and they took it to a stage. It was called the BIM Toolkit, I think, at the time. They took it to a stage and then said to industry, "There you go, guys, over to you." And what's happened? Not an awful lot, to be honest. So yes, I would agree, we need a methodology, certainly if we're going to get up to levels 2, 3, 4, 5 of the BIM scenario. But I suspect,
Mike, can I just also add, just conscious of time, there is a project at the moment which is happening with Building Smart, where a consortium of FM experts are getting together to do exactly what you've just discussed. And I'm in the team, but there is quite a big group of people from IFMA and several other organisations. So if people are interested in it as a topic, I don't think it's something, to be honest, that needs to be just UK specific. I think it's a more generic topic that needs to be addressed. But there are a lot of people thinking about this problem, and there is a specific group in Building Smart who are addressing it. So if anybody's interested, Kathy, I can share the link with you later, and you can make it available to people who have been on the call.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Simon. I should say that we've probably had another 10, 12 questions come in that we just don't have time to answer today. But what we will do is put them to our panel afterwards, and we'll try to share the answers on the IWFM Technology Special Interest Group's LinkedIn page. So if you follow that, and then we can get some of the answers to your questions there. So thank you very much to everybody for joining. I think I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope you have too. I think there's been some great analogies. My favourite one, as a mini driver, my favourite one is Simon's analogy of wanting a Rolls-Royce building and ended up with a Mini. I'm trying not to be affronted by that, but I think it was a great analogy of how important BIM is. It was interesting. I think Mike started off talking about the really kind of slow adoption of BIM in the UK and some of the reasons why that is, and the very fact that it's the emphasis on maintaining the data that you have. We've talked about all the benefits of BIM. We've talked about some of the reduction in costs, 1.5 to 3%, and the sustainability angle, easier handovers, and of course the important thing for FMs that we're always talking about is being involved in projects from the outset. But I really love the idea of the single source of data. But I think some of Mike's queries about making sure that you only really ask for the data that you want, and actually obviously sometimes that can be quite challenging, or you may well find yourself drowning in the data lake. So I think being realistic about what you can get out of it is good. And some of the questions that come in have been quite technical, we haven't been able to cover, but it just shows that there is a huge amount of interest in this topic. So just as I said at the start, this is part of a two-part series. The next webinar will take place on the 20th of May, and I think a couple of your questions will probably feed into that as well. So here's the information for that. While you make a note of that, if you're recording your CPD, then I should let you know that today's CPD number is 890016. So thank you very much again once to our panel, so Dr. Simon Ashworth, Jason Clark and Mike Packham, to the IWFM Special Interest Group on Technology for putting this event on, particularly to Hazel Bedson at Service Works Global behind the scenes for all her hard work, and obviously to you, the audience, for participating. We hope to see you on the 20th of May for the second part.